Reports are presently arriving. As I'm documenting this on January 2nd, 2026, I am receiving communications from commercial purchasers, from acquisition supervisors, from directors of supply chains at companies that fabricate electronics throughout the United States, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Every single dispatch conveys the identical message. The refiners in China with whom we've collaborated for years, the vendors who have consistently fulfilled our purchase orders for decades, the trading entities that processed our agreements without difficulty, they are all stating no. They cite new stipulations for export permits. They reference alterations in governmental directives. They offer sincere apologies, yet they are declining to export silver. The Chinese Silver Export Licensing Framework, effective January 1st, 2026, is not merely a procedural formality. It is not a superficial administrative hurdle that can be overcome with the appropriate contacts or payments. It is a system of enforcement that became active at midnight Beijing time on January 1st. And within the last 36 hours, we are witnessing the initial surge of denial notices, customs rejections, and contract revocations affecting Western buyers who believed they could continue obtaining refined silver from China as they had for the preceding 20 years. This is not conjecture. This is not me forecasting potential events. This is me detailing what is transpiring at this moment. The export prohibition is a concrete reality. The enforcement is immediate, and the ramifications for the global silver market are dire. Ladies and gentlemen, your Asian correspondent here. For months, we have been alerting you to China's preparations to secure its silver refining capabilities. We addressed the announcement on November 28, 2024, regarding the new export licensing system. We elucidated the requirement for an annual production of 80 metric tons and the necessity of a $30 million credit line. We demonstrated how these benchmarks would disqualify numerous small and medium-sized refiners and trading firms. We predicted that 400 million ounces of refined silver per annum would be withdrawn from international commerce and retained within China's domestic market. However, prior to January 1st, there remained a possibility that the policy would not be rigorously enforced. There was optimism that existing agreements would be honored under prior terms. There was a conviction that established business connections and diplomatic influence would facilitate workarounds. That possibility has now vanished. The enforcement is absolute, the channels are sealed, and Western industrial purchasers who were relying on Chinese silver to meet their production schedules for the first quarter of 2026 are discovering that their supply chain has abruptly disintegrated. Allow me to present the specific reports we are receiving. These are not unverified rumors. These are authenticated rejections from named corporations, complete with email captures, official customs rejection notices, and letters of contract termination that confirm the export embargo is no longer theoretical, but an operational fact. Report 1. A mid-sized electronics manufacturer in California, producing circuit boards for automotive vendors, has been acquiring refined silver from a trading house in Shenzhen for 8 years. Their typical quarterly order amounts to 180,000 ounces. On December 27th, they submitted their purchase order for the first quarter of 2026 as usual. On January 2nd, they received an email from their supplier in Shenzhen. The correspondent stated, "Due to new Chinese government export licensing requirements, effective January 1st, 2026, our company does not meet the qualifications for export licenses for refined silver. Consequently, we are unable to fulfill your order. We regret any inconvenience this may cause and will process a refund for your deposit. We advise you to seek alternative suppliers." The California-based manufacturer promptly contacted 3 other Chinese trading houses with whom they had prior dealings. All 3 provided nearly identical responses. None of them qualify for export licenses, and none of them can dispatch silver from China. The manufacturer is now urgently attempting to procure 180,000 ounces from United States-based dealers, with delivery options that are not immediate. They have found that United States dealers are quoting delivery times of 18 to 24 weeks, with premiums ranging from $32 to $45 above the spot price. Delivery slots for immediate dispatch in March are completely reserved. They are unable to obtain the metal. Report 2. A European manufacturer of solar panels, headquartered in Germany, operates production facilities across Europe and has been sourcing silver paste from a refinery in Guangdong province that specializes in high-purity, solar-grade silver. Their annual contract stipulated 2.4 million ounces. On December 30th, they received notification from the Guangdong refinery indicating that the refinery's application for an export license had been denied by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. The denial was attributed to the refinery's annual production capacity being only 62 metric tons, falling below the 80 metric ton minimum threshold. The contract is terminated with immediate effect, and no future shipments will be dispatched. The German manufacturer has a 6-month supply of inventory. Beyond that period, their production lines will cease operation unless alternative suppliers are secured. They have contacted refiners in Australia, Canada, and Mexico. Each of them stated that 90% of their output is already committed under multi-year contracts negotiated between 2022 and 2024. The available spot production from non-Chinese refiners globally amounts to approximately 15 to 20 million ounces annually. The German manufacturer alone requires 2.4 million ounces. When considering all other European manufacturers in similar predicaments, the demand for non-Chinese refined silver surpasses the available supply by a ratio of 10 to 1. Report 3. A Japanese manufacturer of batteries, which supplies cells to Toyota, Honda, and Nissan, has been sourcing silver from a major Chinese state-owned refining enterprise for 12 years. On January 1st, they received official notification that the state-owned refinery had been granted an export license under the new system, as it satisfied the 80-ton capacity and $30 million credit requirements. However, the notification included a new stipulation. All export contracts are now contingent upon governmental approval on a shipment-by-shipment basis. Priority will be afforded to Chinese domestic manufacturers and strategic partners. Export allocations to foreign purchasers will be determined by diplomatic considerations and trade balance factors. Even with a license, the Chinese government retains the authority to decide whether any specific shipment to a Japanese buyer is authorized. The Japanese manufacturer submitted a request for approval to export 450,000 ounces in February. On January 2nd, the request was denied without any explanation. The manufacturer has no recourse and no legal avenue to compel approval. They are entirely dependent on the discretion of Chinese officials, who have every incentive to prioritize Chinese manufacturers over foreign competitors. These 3 reports represent merely the initial instances. I have received 17 comparable accounts in the last 36 hours from purchasers across North America, Europe, and Asia. The pattern is identical. Chinese refiners are either disqualified entirely because they do not meet the 80-ton and $30 million thresholds, or they possess licenses, but government approval for specific exports is being denied or indefinitely postponed. The outcome remains the same. Western buyers are unable to obtain silver from China. Now allow me to explain why this is not merely a temporary disruption, why this is not a bureaucratic delay that will be resolved in a few weeks, why this constitutes a permanent structural alteration in the global silver market that will necessitate a complete revaluation of the commodity. China commands approximately 60% to 70% of the world's silver refining capacity. This pertains to refining, not mining. Silver ore is extracted in numerous nations, including Mexico, Peru, Australia, the United States, Canada, Poland, and Russia. However, the majority of this ore, after extraction, is transported to China for refining due to the presence of smelters, expertise, and capacity. China achieved this refining dominance over a 30-year period by investing in infrastructure, cultivating skilled professionals, and operating at an immense scale with lower costs than Western refiners could match. For decades, this system functioned exceptionally well for all parties involved. Western manufacturers could procure inexpensive refined silver from China. Chinese refiners profited from processing ore. Miners had a dependable buyer for their concentrate. It was a globalized supply chain built on comparative advantage and free trade. That system has now concluded. By implementing export licenses with prohibitively high thresholds, China has effectively nationalized its refining output. The silver that previously flowed freely from Chinese refiners to Western buyers is now confined within China's domestic market. It is directed to BYD, to KATL, to Chinese solar manufacturers, to Chinese electronics companies, and to Chinese aerospace contractors. It bolsters strategic reserves and supports China's industrial policy objectives. It does not leave the country. The volume in question is staggering. If China refines 60% to 70% of the world's silver, and global refining output is approximately 1 billion ounces annually, encompassing primary mining, byproduct recovery, and recycling, then China processes 600 to 700 million ounces each year. Not all of this is exported. Some remains in China for domestic consumption. However, conservatively, 400 million ounces annually previously flowed from Chinese refiners to Western purchasers. As of January 1, 2026, that flow of 400 million ounces has ceased. To provide perspective, the COMEX-registered vault, which holds silver available for delivery against futures contracts, currently contains 38 million ounces. China has effectively removed 400 million ounces annually from global trade, which is more than 10 times the total capacity of the entire COMEX vault each year. Global mine production approximates 822 million ounces annually, but 70% of this is a byproduct of copper, lead, and zinc mining. It is already allocated to smelters under long-term agreements. The uncontracted primary silver mining, the metal that can be redirected to new buyers, amounts to perhaps 120 to 165 million ounces annually. Therefore, Western buyers have just lost access to 400 million ounces from Chinese refiners. To compensate, they are competing for a mere 165 million ounces of uncontracted mine production, plus whatever COMEX and London can deliver from their vaults, plus any inventory held by dealers, plus recycled material. The arithmetic does not reconcile. There is insufficient non-Chinese silver to replace what has just vanished from the market. This brings us directly to the emergency meeting at Samsung on December 18th. Because now we comprehend precisely why COMEX could only offer Samsung 5.2 million ounces out of the 50 million they requested. COMEX was aware of the impending January 1st export ban. COMEX understood that hundreds of industrial buyers who had been sourcing from China would be compelled to turn to COMEX as their alternative. COMEX recognized that the vault would face unprecedented delivery demands. Samsung's procurement team mentioned in their leaked internal document that Chinese suppliers had cautioned them about imminent export restrictions. Those warnings proved to be accurate. Samsung's Chinese refiners are incapable of exporting. Samsung attempted to secure supply from COMEX and was offered only 10% of their requirement. Now Samsung finds itself in the same predicament as the California circuit board manufacturer, the German solar panel company, and the Japanese battery maker. They require silver, their usual sourcing channels are obstructed, and the alternative channels lack the capacity to serve them. This is the industrial crisis we have been anticipating, and it is unfolding precisely as we predicted. The denial reports arriving now are empirical evidence that the export ban is not merely a policy announcement, but an enforcement reality that is severing supply chains in real time. Allow me to illustrate why Western buyers cannot simply replicate China's refining capacity. The immediate response from anyone unfamiliar with commodity supply chains is to suggest that if China will not sell us silver, we will establish our own refineries or acquire more from Australia, Canada, and Mexico. This proposition stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the time required to build refining capacity and the extent to which existing non-Chinese capacity is already operating at its peak utilization. Constructing a new silver refinery from inception requires a minimum of 5 to 7 years. This involves securing permits, conducting environmental impact assessments, designing and building the facility, hiring and training personnel, establishing relationships with mines to secure concentrate, and developing logistical infrastructure for receiving ore and dispatching refined product. It also demands tens of millions of dollars in capital investment. Even if a Western company decided today, January 2nd, 2026, to build a refinery capable of producing 80 metric tons annually, mirroring the Chinese threshold. Such a refinery would not commence operations until 2031 or 2032, which is 6 years from now. What are Western manufacturers expected to do during these intervening 6 years? How will they maintain their production lines while awaiting new refining capacity? The answer is that they cannot. They must contend for the existing non-Chinese capacity. However, that capacity is already fully utilized. Let me present the figures. The largest silver refiners outside of China are situated in Australia, Canada, Mexico, Peru, the United States, and Poland. Collectively, these refiners process approximately 300 to 400 million ounces annually. This figure appears substantial until one considers two critical factors. Firstly, the majority of this output is already committed under multi-year contracts signed years prior. When a mine enters into an agreement with a refiner, it commits its ore output for a period of 3 to 5 years. The refiner then sells the refined product to industrial buyers under contracts that align with the mine's timeline. These contractual obligations are fixed and cannot be easily rescinded. Secondly, these refiners operate at 95% to 98% capacity utilization. They are not idle awaiting new business. They are operating at full capacity, processing every ounce of ore they can handle. There is no surplus capacity, no vacant shifts, and no unused smelters. The available spot production, representing the silver that non-Chinese refiners can offer to new buyers without existing contracts, amounts to approximately 15 to 20 million ounces annually worldwide. Let me reiterate. Globally, the uncontracted refined silver available from non-Chinese sources is approximately 20 million ounces per year. Now consider the demand. Samsung alone requires 50 million ounces. Tesla needs 38 million ounces. First Solar requires 42 million ounces. Nvidia needs 23 million ounces. That totals 153 million ounces from just these 4 companies. There are 50 other significant industrial users. When their requirements are aggregated, the Western industrial demand, which has just lost access to Chinese supply, is in the range of 400 to 500 million ounces. All these entities are vying for the same 20 million ounces of uncontracted non-Chinese refining output. The ratio stands at 20 to 1 or 25 to 1. Demand outstrips available supply by a factor of 20. The only other recourse lies with COMEX and London vaults. COMEX held 38 million ounces in registered inventory as of December 27th. London possesses approximately 900 million ounces in its vaults, but only a fraction of this is available for commercial sale. The majority is allocated to ETFs such as SLV or held in custody for institutional investors. Consequently, Western buyers have lost 400 million ounces from Chinese refiners. They are attempting to replace this with 20 million ounces of non-Chinese refining capacity, 38 million ounces from COMEX, and perhaps 50 to 100 million ounces that they can extract from London or dealer networks. This represents 138 to 158 million ounces of replacement supply against 400 million ounces of lost Chinese supply. The deficit is between 240 and 290 million ounces annually. There is no viable solution. The market is structurally compromised. This directly connects to the COMEX vault depletion crisis we discussed in the preceding video. The 38 million ounces in COMEX registered inventory are not sitting idle, awaiting buyers. They are already subject to delivery demands from 145,000 March 2026 futures contracts, representing 725 million ounces of delivery rights. We calculated that 60 to 90 million ounces would likely be presented for delivery on February 12th, driven by industrial buyers in need of the metal. Now, factor in the 400 million ounce Chinese export ban. Every Western buyer who was counting on Chinese supply to fulfill their first and second quarter 2026 orders is now turning to COMEX as their fallback option. The delivery demands hitting on February 12th will not be in the range of 60 to 90 million ounces. They will surge to 120 to 180 million ounces as panicked buyers attempt to secure whatever they can from the only remaining liquid source. A vault containing 38 million ounces cannot satisfy delivery demands of 120 to 180 million ounces. The collision on February 12th, which we predicted, will be far more severe than our initial calculations suggested, because the Chinese export ban has effectively multiplied the pressure on COMEX by a factor of 2 or 3. This is the inevitable downward spiral. China restricts exports, Western buyers panic, COMEX delivery demands escalate, and the vault drains at an accelerated pace. The drainage rate, which was 847,000 ounces per day in late December, is poised to increase to 1.2 to 1.5 million ounces per day in January. At this rate, the vault will be depleted before February 12th. COMEX will be compelled to implement emergency measures in late January, not late February. The timeline has compressed by 3 to 4 weeks. Allow me to elucidate the geopolitical strategy underpinning the timing of this export ban. China did not arbitrarily select January 1st, 2026. It was chosen to coincide with a moment of maximum leverage. It is the juncture when Western supply chains are most vulnerable and when COMEX vaults are most depleted. This represents a calculated checkmate maneuver. China has been observing the depletion of the COMEX registered inventory for 12 months. They witnessed it decrease from 94.6 million ounces in January 2025 to 38 million ounces by December 27, 2025. They tracked the depletion curve and recognized that the vault was approaching critical levels. They were aware that Western industrial buyers were already experiencing difficulties in sourcing the metal. They noted that dealers were suspending orders and quoting extended delivery delays, and they opted to implement the export ban at the precise moment when the West possesses the least capacity to absorb the shock. Had China enacted this policy in January 2024, when COMEX held 95 million ounces and dealer inventories were robust, Western buyers would have had time to adapt. They could have built inventory reserves, secured multi-year contracts with non-Chinese refiners, and lobbied governments to subsidize new refining capacity. However, by waiting until the vault contained only 38 million ounces and dealer networks had already suspended operations, China ensured that Western buyers have no buffer. There is no time for adjustment, and no alternative supply is readily available. This precipitates an immediate crisis, necessitating immediate decisions. And the decision China intends for Western manufacturers to make is unequivocally clear. Relocate your production to China. If Samsung desires guaranteed access to silver for its battery manufacturing, it should establish its factory in Shenzhen, not Texas. If Tesla requires refining capacity for its Cybertruck, it should construct a facility in China in partnership with a state-owned entity. If First Solar aims to expand its panel manufacturing, it should do so in China, where the silver supply is controlled and allocated. This is not resource nationalism for its own sake. It is industrial policy. China is leveraging its control over refining capacity to reverse the trend of reshoring and to draw manufacturing back to Chinese territory. The United States has invested billions through the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act to facilitate the repatriation of semiconductor and battery production. These investments are now imperiled, as the factories cannot operate without silver, and that silver is held in China. Samsung's leaked internal document mentioned preliminary discussions regarding a joint venture battery production facility in Guangdong province. This is not a coincidence. China is presenting an offer. You desire precious metal. Establish your operations here. Seeking export permits? Form a joint venture with our domestic enterprises. Require assured delivery? Operate according to our established protocols. Every Western manufacturer will confront a similar predicament in the ensuing weeks. Either concede to China's stipulations and relocate manufacturing to the People's Republic, or face a scarcity of essential materials and interruptions in production at their facilities located in the West. This represents an economic strong-arm tactic on a scale unseen since the oil embargoes imposed by OPEC in the 1970s. Furthermore, Beijing is aware that the United States cannot effectively retaliate, as the US lacks control over a strategic commodity that China desperately requires. The People's Republic of China possesses self-sufficiency in food production. it has secured a dominant position in the processing of rare earth elements. It controls the global refining of numerous crucial minerals. What leverage does the United States possess? Perhaps soybeans or films produced by Hollywood. The disparity is profound. This is essentially financial and industrial conflict disguised as a licensing mechanism for exports, and it is proving effective. Now, allow me to illustrate the situation within the automotive distribution networks, as the Chinese export prohibition is not solely impacting large industrial purchases. It is also affecting individual investors endeavoring to acquire physical silver, and the ramifications for availability and price premiums are immediate and severe. For the past 10 years, retailers of silver in both the United States and Europe have procured a substantial portion of their inventory from Chinese refineries. The Chinese possess the capability to produce official sovereign coins, generic bullion rounds, and 100-ounce bars at a lower cost than their Western counterparts. Dealers would place bulk orders with trading firms situated in Shanghai or Shenzhen, and the metal would typically arrive in the US within a time frame of 4 to 6 weeks. Subsequently, these dealers would apply a markup and offer the metal to retail buyers. This constituted a fluid supply chain that maintained reasonable price premiums. That particular supply chain has now been abruptly severed. I am receiving reports from prominent dealers indicating that their shipments from China scheduled for January have been cancelled. The trading houses are citing the export ban as the reason. These dealers are now making urgent efforts to source supplies from American mints and refineries, but those facilities are already overwhelmed with existing orders. The United States Mint is operating at its maximum capacity to produce American Silver Eagles. Private mints, such as Sunshine Minting and Asahi, are running 3 shifts around the clock, yet are still unable to meet the prevailing demand. The consequence is that dealer stockpiles, which were already reduced to 18% of their normal levels based on our investigation of 50 dealers conducted in December, are now approaching 0. Dealers who were quoting delivery delays of 12 to 16 weeks in late December are now displaying out-of-stock indefinitely notices on their websites, and the price premiums are skyrocketing. In late December, the average premium over the spot price for retail coins and rounds was $18.40 per ounce. As of January 2nd, I am observing premiums ranging from $32 to $45 per ounce from dealers who still possess any inventory. Some dealers are quoting premiums exceeding $50 for immediate delivery of sovereign coins, such as Canadian Maple Leafs or Austrian Philharmonics. Let me elucidate what this signifies in monetary terms. The spot price of silver on the commodities market is currently trading around $79 per ounce. If you wish to purchase a 1-ounce silver coin from a retail dealer at this moment, you would be paying $79 plus a $40 premium, totaling $119 per ounce. This represents a 50% increase above the paper price. The divergence between the paper and physical markets is accelerating. Silver traded on commodities exchanges at $79 is based on the supply and demand dynamics for futures contracts. Physical silver, the tangible metal one can hold, is trading at $119, driven by actual availability at retail vendors. The disparity amounts to $40 per ounce. This gap is projected to widen further as China's export prohibition continues and dealer inventories are depleted entirely. And here lies the crucial point. When dealers exhaust their inventory completely, the option for retail purchase effectively disappears. One cannot acquire silver at any price if there is no silver available for sale. The commodity's price then becomes irrelevant, as it reflects the value of paper contracts, not the physical metal that can be delivered to your doorstep. We are rapidly approaching that juncture. We are likely 2 to 3 weeks away from a situation where the majority of retail dealers will suspend all orders indefinitely due to a lack of supply and no foreseeable indication of when new supply might become available. The Chinese source has been cut off. The American mints are backlogged. The commodities exchange vaults are being depleted by industrial consumers. There is nowhere for dealers to obtain the metal. We are entering what can be described as the unobtainium phase, where silver becomes unattainable regardless of its price. You could possess $200 in cash and be unable to purchase a single 1-ounce coin because no vendor has any available. And when the retail purchase option vanishes, a significant psychological shift occurs in the market. Investors who were holding cash, anticipating a price decrease, will realize that no such decrease will materialize. The opportunity to purchase at a lower price will cease to exist. The decision becomes an immediate one. Act now or forgo the opportunity entirely. This realization will trigger a wave of panic buying, which will further deplete the remaining dealer inventory at an even more accelerated rate, thereby expediting the timeline to complete unavailability. It is a self-perpetuating cycle. The Chinese export ban initiated the reduction in dealer supply. Reduced supply led to a surge in price premiums. High premiums signaled scarcity. Scarcity incited panic buying. Panic buying depleted inventory. Depleted inventory resulted in complete unavailability. Unavailability confirmed the reality of the shortage. Confirmation of the shortage validated higher prices. Higher prices attracted more buyers. An increased number of buyers chasing a diminished quantity of metal causes the cycle to accelerate. We are currently in the initial stages of this spiral. The export ban, effective January 1st, served as the catalyst. The subsequent 4 to 6 weeks will represent the acceleration phase. By early February, the retail silver market will effectively be closed to new entrants. Now let me outline the cascading industrial panic that is poised to unfold across multiple sectors simultaneously. This is because the Chinese export prohibition impacts not merely a single company or industry, but rather every manufacturer that incorporates silver into its production processes. And when numerous sectors simultaneously discover the shortage, the panic is amplified exponentially. The automotive industry, particularly electric vehicles, utilizes between 18 and 24 grams of silver per vehicle in their battery management systems, power electronics, and charging circuits. Global electric vehicle production in 2026 is projected to reach 18 million units, which necessitates approximately 360 million ounces of silver. The top 10 global automakers all procure silver paste and conductive materials from Chinese suppliers. As of January 1st, these suppliers are no longer permitted to export. Consequently, every single automaker is now vying for the same limited 20 million ounces of non-Chinese refining capacity. The solar industry utilizes silver paste for electrical connections on solar cells within photovoltaic panels. There is no commercially viable substitute that can maintain the same level of efficiency. Global solar panel production in 2026 is anticipated to require 183 million ounces of silver. The largest solar panel manufacturers are Chinese corporations, including LONGi, Trina Solar, and Jinko Solar. These companies have direct access to domestically refined silver within China. Western solar manufacturers such as First Solar, Canadian Solar, and various European producers do not share this advantage. Western manufacturers are being deprived of essential materials while their Chinese competitors are assured of a steady supply. This creates a significant competitive imbalance. If First Solar is unable to acquire silver, they cannot produce panels, and consequently, they will lose market share to their Chinese rivals who can maintain production. The Chinese export ban is not solely about stockpiling resources. It is also about undermining Western competitors. In the electronics sector, semiconductors, memory chips, smartphones, laptops, servers, and networking equipment all rely on silver for bonding wires, solder, and thermal interface materials. The global electronics industry consumes approximately 67 million ounces of silver annually. Supply chain managers at companies like Samsung, Apple, Intel, AMD, Nvidia, and dozens of others are currently discovering that their Chinese silver suppliers are unable to fulfill their first quarter orders. These corporations possess an inventory buffer of 6 to 12 weeks. Beyond that period, production lines will either slow down or halt entirely. A semiconductor fabrication plant that cannot obtain silver bonding wire will be unable to package its chips. A smartphone assembly line that is unable to secure silver solder will be incapable of constructing phones. The entire electronic supply chain is therefore at risk. The aerospace and defense sectors, encompassing military electronics, satellite systems, missile guidance systems, and radar arrays all require high-reliability silver components. Defense contractors procure silver through specialized suppliers who refine it to meet stringent military specifications. Many of these specialized firms source their raw materials from China. The export ban effectively cuts off their supply chain. Defense production is now in direct competition with the commercial electronics sector for the same limited reserves of non-Chinese silver. This has become a matter of national security. If Boeing is unable to secure silver for the avionics systems in its 787 aircraft, the delivery of these planes will be delayed. If Lockheed is unable to obtain silver for the electronic components of the F-35 fighter jet, its production will slow. The United States Department of Defense may be compelled to intervene and implement domestic allocation of silver, prioritizing defense contracts over commercial production. In the medical sector, encompassing medical imaging equipment, surgical instruments, antimicrobial coatings, and diagnostic devices, the industry utilizes approximately 15 million ounces of silver annually. Hospitals cannot defer equipment purchases due to a metal shortage. Patients require imaging procedures, and surgeons need their instruments. Medical device manufacturers will likely offer whatever price is necessary to secure silver, thereby further driving up prices. When we aggregate the demand from the automotive, solar, electronics, aerospace, and medical sectors, we are looking at an annual industrial demand exceeding 650 million ounces. All of this was dependent on a supply chain that included 400 million ounces sourced from Chinese refineries. That particular source has now vanished. The sense of panic is spreading across all sectors. Every procurement manager is initiating the same phone calls, sending identical emails, and receiving the same negative responses. This is not merely a shortage of silver. It represents a collapse of the supply chain with implications for the entirety of the modern economy. And the situation is exacerbated because China's export prohibition not only affects current production, but also future investment and strategic planning. If you are the chief financial officer of an electronics company, and you observe that silver supply is constrained, and you cannot reliably procure the necessary materials, what course of action do you take? You would likely halt expansion plans, postpone new product introductions, reduce production forecasts, and curtail capital expenditures. This contraction in industrial activity then feeds back into the broader economy. If Samsung reduces battery production due to an inability to obtain silver, Tesla will be unable to acquire batteries for its Cybertrucks. If Tesla scales back truck production, it will result in layoffs. Unemployed individuals spend less, leading to a decrease in consumer demand and a contraction in gross domestic product. The silver shortage thus becomes a catalyst for recession. Central banks will likely react with panic, implementing interest rate cuts and resuming quantitative easing, thereby injecting money into the economy to stimulate demand. However, the printing of money does not generate silver. It merely devalues the currency and consequently increases the nominal price of silver. This initiates a doom loop at the macroeconomic level. A commodity shortage triggers a recession, which prompts money printing, which in turn leads to inflation, making commodities more expensive, thus deepening the recession, and so forth. We are witnessing the playbook of the 1970s oil crisis being replicated in real time, with silver taking the place of oil. The era of stagflation is poised to return. Now let me explain why the separation between the Chinese market and the Western market is now irreversible. Even if China were to revoke the export ban tomorrow, the damage has already been inflicted. Trust has been eroded, supply chains have been fractured, and Western buyers will no longer place their reliance on Chinese supply. Consider Samsung's predicament. They attempted to procure 50 million ounces from commodity exchanges and only secured 5.2 million ounces. They then sought to source from Chinese refineries and were met with export denials. They are now contemplating relocating production to China to guarantee access to supply. However, even if China were to reverse course and lift the export ban, do you genuinely believe Samsung would trust such a decision? Do you think they believe China would refrain from weaponizing export permits again in the future? Unlikely. Samsung, and indeed every other Western manufacturer, now understands that Chinese supply is inherently unreliable. It is subject to the whims of government policy and can be terminated overnight for political reasons. Responsible supply chain management mandates diversification away from such risks. Consequently, Western companies are expected to spend the next 5 years endeavoring to establish non-Chinese refining capacity. They will enter into long-term agreements with refiners in Australia, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. They will invest in vertical integration, acquiring stakes in mining companies to secure their supply. They will establish strategic reserves to mitigate the impact of future disruptions. While all of these actions are rational, none of them will alleviate the immediate crisis in the first quarter of 2026. The construction of new refineries typically takes 5 to 7 years. The signing of new mining contracts will provide benefits for the 2027 and 2028 supply periods, but not for 2026. Strategic reserves necessitate the immediate acquisition of physical metal, and there is currently insufficient quantity available for such purchases. The bifurcation is now firmly established. China possesses the silver. China dictates its allocation. Chinese manufacturers receive preferential treatment. Western manufacturers must compete for the remnants. This is the new structural reality, and it is likely to persist for years, even if the export ban is eventually lifted due to the behavioral changes it has instigated. Diversification away from Chinese supply requires years to implement effectively, and China stands to benefit from this bifurcation. By compelling Western companies to either relocate production to China or contend with supply shortages, China ensures a competitive advantage for its domestic manufacturers. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers benefit from guaranteed silver supply, while their Western counterparts face shortages. Similarly, Chinese solar panel manufacturers have assured silver supply, while Western manufacturers struggle. This leads to a shift in market share from the West to the East. This issue extends beyond silver. It represents China's strategic objective of reshaping global manufacturing to its advantage, employing export licensing of a strategic commodity to achieve this aim. So, what transpires in the next 30 days? Allow me to present a projected timeline as the pace of events is accelerating and the windows of opportunity for action are rapidly closing. From January 3rd to January 10th, further reports of export denials will flood in. Every industrial purchaser that attempted to source from China in late December will receive rejection notices in early January. Media outlets will commence coverage of the situation. Bloomberg, for instance, might publish an article titled, "China's Silver Export Curbs Begin to Impact Western Manufacturers." The narrative will enter the mainstream. Public awareness among retail investors will increase, leading to a surge in the purchase of physical silver. From January 11th to January 20th, the depletion of the commodities exchange vault will accelerate. Registered inventory is projected to decrease from 38 million to 30 million ounces within a 10-day period, as industrial buyers take delivery to preempt the crisis expected on February 12th. Premiums over the spot price will escalate dramatically, from $40 to $60, and then to $75. Dealers will begin suspending orders. Large inflows into silver-backed exchange-traded funds, ETFs, will occur, but they will be unable to secure sufficient physical backing. The percentage of unallocated silver will reach 20%, triggering suspensions of redemptions. From January 21st to January 31st, the commodities vault inventory will fall below 25 million ounces. Margin requirements will be quietly increased from $8,000 to $15,000 to curb speculative positions. Industrial buyers will enter a state of panic. Companies such as Samsung, Tesla, and First Solar will all endeavor to secure the maximum possible delivery from commodities exchanges. Position limits will be implemented, preventing any single entity from acquiring more than 1,000 contracts. The ceiling will become apparent, signaling an imminent collapse. From February 1st to February 12th, the vault inventory will stand between 18 and 22 million ounces. Open interest in March contracts will be in the range of 60,000 to 80,000 as speculators exit their positions. What will remain is industrial desperation. Delivery notices will be filed on February 12th totaling between 80 and 120 million ounces. The commodities exchanges will be unable to fulfill these demands. Emergency measures will be announced, such as cash settlement incentives and extensions of delivery windows. However, none of these measures are expected to be effective. By February 25th, a force majeure declaration may become necessary. This outlines the anticipated sequence of events. The Chinese export ban implemented on January 1st has effectively expedited the timeline by 3 to 4 weeks. The crisis that was projected to peak in late February is now expected to peak in late January. The vault depletion that was anticipated to reach critical levels by mid-February might occur as early as January 20th. Everything is compressed and everything is happening at an accelerated pace. The window of opportunity to position oneself before the crisis becomes widely known has shrunk from approximately 45 days to perhaps 20 days. Therefore, what actions should be taken immediately? If you do not currently possess physical silver, you likely have 1 to 2 weeks to acquire some before retail dealers effectively cease taking orders, aside from those with premiums of $40 to $50 and delivery delays of 18 to 24 weeks. Secure your order while it is still possible. After January 15th, there will likely be no inventory available for purchase. If you already own physical silver, recognize that you are holding an asset that has become 10 times scarcer due to the removal of 400 million ounces annually from global trade. Your metal is not valued at the $7 paper price. It is worth the $119 physical price, and in 4 weeks it could be worth over $180 when the February crisis materializes. If you are invested in SLV or paper-based ETFs, understand that redemptions will be suspended when the unallocated silver percentage reaches 20%, which is anticipated within the next 2 weeks. Exit these positions while you still can if your objective is physical ownership, or consider diversifying into mining stocks if you are seeking equity exposure. If you are involved in futures contracts for physical delivery, be aware that position limits are forthcoming. Commodities exchanges will not permit you to take possession of 50 million ounces, even if you hold the corresponding contracts. They will likely cap you at a maximum of 5 million ounces. Plan accordingly. The export ban implemented on January 1st is not merely a policy announcement, it is an enforcement action that is currently underway. The denial notices are legitimate, the contracts are being cancelled, and the shipments are being halted. Western buyers are unable to procure Chinese silver. 400 million ounces annually have been removed from global trade. The commodities exchange vault currently holds 38 million ounces. The collision event scheduled for February 12th has now been advanced to January 25th. The timeline is compressed and the crisis is already upon us. Hold your ground. The export ban serves to corroborate everything we have been asserting. The shortage is real, the supply chain is fractured, and the price is on the verge of reflecting a new reality where Western industrial buyers are competing for merely 10% of the silver they require, and physical metal is becoming unobtainable at any price. The reports are commencing to arrive, the denials are documented, the export ban is being enforced, and the most significant silver shortage in history has transitioned from a theoretical possibility to an operational reality within a mere 36 hours. You have been forewarned.